The wind had teeth that morning, biting through wool and worn leather as it swept across the plains. It whistled through the grass like an omen, stirring dust and silence in equal measure. By the time Callum Boyd rode up on the girl, the frost had begun to melt along the cuffs of his coat, leaving his gloves damp and fingers numb. He spotted her by a lonely stand of juniper, a heap of calico and bones still as the earth beneath. She didn't flinch when his mare snorted or when the creak of his saddle marked his stop. Just stood there with her arms crossed tight over her chest, one boot scuffed near the toe, the other patched with canvas, as if she'd walked a long way from nowhere and meant to go further still. Her eyes met his without blinking, gray as slate and hollow as a dry well. "Storm's rollin' in," Callum said, his voice sanded down by days without use. "You ought to be somewhere with a roof over it." She didn't speak right off, just kept her jaw set and her shoulders braced against the cold. But her gaze dropped to the mule he had in tow, saddlebags full, second blanket lashed down tight. She looked like she was weighing something. "Where you headed?" she asked. Callum lifted his chin toward the sunless horizon. "West, anywhere with grass enough and folks few enough." He didn't expect her to say yes, didn't expect her to say anything more. But she took a step forward, slow and careful, like a wild creature testing the air. "I'll ride with you, just till the next town." He studied her a moment. She wasn't armed, and if she had food, it wasn't much. There was a smudge of dried blood near the hem of her dress. Not enough to be hers, maybe not recent. Still, he nodded and swung down from the saddle. "You ride the mule," he said. "Name, Cypress. Stubborn but sure-footed." She didn't smile, but she moved with purpose, took the reins and adjusted the cinch without asking how. When she mounted, it was clear she knew her way around a saddle, though her posture said she hadn't sat one in some time. They rode in silence for most of the day, only the wind and the muffled crunch of hooves in brittle grass between them. He didn't press her with questions. Hadn't liked it himself when folks tried to talk the story out of him. Some griefs prefer their silence. Late afternoon, they reached a rise overlooking a bend in the river. Callum swung down and gestured toward a patch of scrub that offered slight shelter. "We'll make camp here, still a few hours of light." She dismounted without a word, but he saw the stiffness in her legs, the wince she tried to hide. He handed her a strip of jerky from his coat pocket. She took it without thanks and chewed like she hadn't eaten proper in days. They didn't build a fire. Smoke was a signal, and neither of them wanted company. Callum rolled his blanket out and settled in against a rock. The girl sat near, but not close. Her eyes stayed on the darkening sky, the kind of watchful quiet that came from losing more than most. After a time, she spoke again. "You ever had to leave someone behind?" Callum looked into the dusk, mourn once. She nodded as if that answer stitched something loose inside her. Didn't say more, just laid back and stared at the stars. When sleep finally took them, it was light and wary. The wind had died down, but the cold remained. In the hush of night, Callum listened to the rhythm of her breathing and knew something old and ruined in her matched something old and hollow in him. He hadn't meant to find company on the trail, but there she was. The morning would bring questions, maybe answers, maybe not. But for now they shared the road, and the silence between them was softer than he'd known in years. The second morning found them beneath a pale sky, rimmed in gold where the sun strained through a veil of low clouds. Callum stirred first, shaking the frost from his blanket and stretching the ache from his limbs. The girl was already sitting up, braid undone, fingers raw where they gripped a tin cup of cold water. She didn't meet his eye, but she didn't flinch when he stepped near, which was something. They broke camp wordlessly, the kind of rhythm two people fall into when neither expects the other to stay, but both know they'll ride side by side a while longer. Callum checked the mule's hooves. She brushed off saddle straps and tied down the gear. They moved like a team without saying so. They rode with the wind at their backs, the land unrolling wide and dry around them. Callum noticed things, the way she scanned the horizon every dozen paces, the way her hand twitched near her side when a hawk's shadow passed over, the way she never let Cypress lag too far behind his own mare. It wasn't until midday that she spoke. "Name's Wren." He glanced over, "Callum." She nodded once. The silence that followed felt easier somehow, like the weight of her name settled something between them. By late afternoon, they passed the burned shell of what had been a homestead, charred beams, a collapsed chimney, nothing left but bones of a life. Wren didn't slow. She looked once, then set her jaw and rode on. Callum watched her from the corner of his eye. She didn't weep, didn't ask if he saw the same thing she did. Some ruins don't need naming. That night they made camp near a creek running shallow but clean. Callum caught 2 trout with his line, gutted and cooked them over a smokeless fire. Wren ate like someone who knew hunger well and didn't talk over her plate. When they finished, she surprised him by drawing a folded scrap of paper from her coat, smoothed it out on her knee. He leaned closer. It was a map, rough and hand-drawn, with only 2 towns marked, one with a cross through it, the other circled. "You headed to Bitterhorn?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Heard it's quiet. Folks keep to themselves. Not much there but a few cabins and a feed store." "That's enough." He nodded. "I was thinkin' of headin' that way too, at least for a spell." She gave him a long look, eyes unreadable, then folded the map again, tucked it back in her coat. "You say that like it matters where you go." Callum took a breath, let it out slow. "Don't mostly, just keep moving west and try not to stick." Something in her softened, just a hair, enough to show she understood. That night sleep came quicker. The fire burned low, and the hush between them wasn't empty anymore. Wren lay a little closer, not touching, but near enough that Callum could hear her dreams catch in her throat. He didn't ask what they were. He'd had enough of his own to know not all things need voicing. Some just need someone nearby when they come. The road stretched ahead, long and uncertain. But for the first time in a while, it didn't feel like walking toward nothing. They reached a patch of prairie dotted with blue wild flax and yarrow, where the wind sang low through the grass and the sun burned gentle above. The road had narrowed into a track barely wide enough for hooves, but they stayed on it all the same. By then, 3 days had passed since Wren climbed onto Cypress, and though neither of them named it, something quiet and sure had settled between them. Not trust exactly, not yet, but something shaped like it, softened by shared firelight and the way they moved without tripping over each other's silences. That morning, Wren asked for the rifle. Callum handed it to her, without a word. She dismounted near a stand of scrub where quail rustled low in the brush. He watched her crouch, steady as stone, then fire once. Clean shot. By the time he reached her, she had the bird in hand, already tying its legs with a length of twine. "I used to hunt for my brothers," she said, eyes on the feathers. "They were small, and I was the quiet one, easier to sneak close." Callum took the bird, nodded slow. "Quiet's useful." She looked up then, and for the first time she smiled. Just a flicker, faint as dust in morning light, but it stayed. They cooked the quail that night with some wild onion Wren dug up near the riverbank. Ate side by side, knees brushing. When Callum passed her a cup of creek water, her fingers lingered against his a second longer than they had before. Small things, but felt. Later, she sat sharpening his skinning knife, and he stitched the tear in her coat where the seam had come loose. No words, just hands moving with care, giving shape to something neither dared define. On the 5th day, trouble found them. They were half a day out from a crossroads trading post, just a weather-worn cabin and a hitch rail out front when they spotted the riders. 3 of them, far off but closing slow. Wren stiffened in the saddle. Callum watched the shapes move, too steady to be wanderers, too loose to be law. Wren's hand went to the rifle, without needing to ask. "You know M?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not these, but I know the kind." Callum weighed their options. The trail cut wide here, no good cover, no ridge to break sight. Only open grass and the thin hope of outpacing men on fresh horses. "We ride," he said. They didn't spur the animals into panic, just turned west and moved at a long, even gait, let the riders think they weren't afraid. Callum glanced back every few minutes, saw the distance holding, then shrinking. By the time they hit the edge of a dry arroyo, he knew they'd have to stand. Couldn't outrun M, not with a mule and daylight falling fast. He turned to Wren. "We dig in here, give M a reason to think twice." She nodded once, slid down from Cypress, and led him behind a low rise of rock and scrub. They set up fast, rifle ready, revolver drawn, saddlebags tucked where they could grab and run if need be. When the riders came into view, they slowed, saw the rifle leveled, the shape of a man who'd killed before. Ren crouched beside him, steady and sharp-eyed, a stone pillar in human form. One of the men rode forward a few paces. "Don't mean trouble, just lookin' for a girl rode out a red hill last week, took something that ain't hers." Ren didn't move. Callum called out, "Ain't no girl here but the one who belongs to herself." The man laughed, a low sound. "She got a cut on her arm and a coin purse full of lies. Boss wants her back." Callum said nothing more, just shifted his weight and laid his finger flat beside the trigger. The man studied them a long while, squinting against the sun, then spat in the dust and turned his horse. They didn't ride off quick, but they left. Ren's hands didn't shake after. But later, after dark, when Callum passed her a strip of dried meat and they sat in the hush of fireless night, she whispered, "It wasn't coin I took. It was the key to the cellar." She didn't explain, and he didn't ask, just nodded slow and let the silence hold her safe a while. They slept light, but they slept side by side. They left the arroyo at first light, boots crusted with frost and eyes drawn to every rise on the horizon. The riders hadn't come back, but Ren checked the back trail twice an hour, and Callum kept one hand close to his belt. There was no safety yet, only distance. The trail curved north for a time, skirting the edge of a dried riverbed choked with cottonwoods and nettle. Midday brought heat and silence so thick it swallowed the sound of hooves. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Every motion held meaning, Ren pointing at tracks in the dust, Callum gesturing toward a narrow break in the trees where water might lie. When they reached the hollow, it wasn't water they found, but a child. A boy no older than 7, crouched beneath a thorn bush, skin brown with dust, cheeks streaked where tears had dried and cracked. He held a stick like a weapon, but his hands trembled. Ren knelt slow, palms open. "You lost." The boy shook his head, then nodded, tears building again. "Mama went to look for berries, didn't come back, it's been days." Callum scanned the brush. No sign of camp, no fire pit, just a tangle of prints and a broken locket near a patch of crushed grass. They didn't discuss it, they stayed. That night they built a small fire, shielded by stone, and let the boy sleep curled between them. Ren murmured a lullaby Callum didn't know, soft and off-key. Her voice cracked halfway through, but the boy didn't stir. Callum watched the flames flicker across her face, saw how she blinked hard and looked away. In the morning, they searched. Hours through bramble and thorn, calling low. It was Callum who found her, wedged in a gully beneath a tangle of deadwood. Leg broken, fever running high, mouth too dry to speak. He carried her back in silence, the weight of her too light. Ren cleaned the wound, boiled water for poultice, held the woman's hand as she woke and wept. The woman's name was Mara. She'd come west with nothing but a bag of flour and 2 children. The other had died on the trail. This one, Eli, was all she had left. They stayed 4 days, long enough for Mara to walk again, if slowly. Ren fashioned a crutch from a cedar limb, Callum built a linta from what the trees gave. And in those quiet evenings, as Mara whispered stories to Eli and the wind softened through the grass, something shifted in the space between Ren and Callum. Not words, not promises. But when he handed her the cup at night, she didn't just take it. She held it with him, their fingers laced warm around tin. When he woke from a dream, breath shallow, she was there with a hand on his chest, grounding him. When she laughed and it came rare, it was whole. On the 5th day, Mara touched Ren's wrist. "You've lost someone, too." Ren nodded. "I can see it," Mara said, "but you still move forward, that's a gift." Ren didn't answer, but she leaned her forehead to the woman for a breath, then turned away. They left Mara with a small pack of dried meat, half a roll of bandage, and a compass Ren had kept sewn in her coat's lining. Mara promised not to waste it, promised to build something where she stood. Back on the trail, Ren didn't speak for miles. But when dusk fell and they stopped to make camp, she came to Callum where he stood watching the sky. "I was 17 when I lost my family," she said. "Raided out of Kansas settlers. They came fast. I hid in the crawl space. My little brother didn't make a sound. He just looked at me and then he was gone." Callum didn't look at her, just waited. "I wandered after that, found work where I could, took nothing I didn't need, but I never stayed. Folks don't want stories like mine hanging round." She stepped closer. "You stayed with Mara, with Eli, with me." Callum turned then, eyes rough with what he wasn't saying. "You didn't ask me to." "No," she said, but you didn't need a reason. He touched her face just once, fingers calloused, gentle as snowfall, and she didn't flinch. They slept beside each other that night, not out of caution or cold, but choice. The road still stretched, Bitterhorn still days off, but something was changing. The trail hadn't grown easier, only more worth walking. The land began to rise, slow and steady, as they moved into the high country. Pines replaced cottonwood, the air turned sharp with resin and smoke, and the wind no longer sang but whispered low through the needles, as if carrying secrets from one pass to the next. The path grew narrow, carved along ridges where shale cracked underfoot and cliffs fell away to forests below. Cypress struggled with the climb, but Wren spoke to the mule in soft tones, coaxing every step as if she understood stubbornness like a sister. Bitterhorn was still beyond the next two ridges, or so said a hunter they crossed paths with, an older man with a silver rifle and no teeth, who traded them a pouch of dried apples for their last spool of thread. He eyed Wren carefully, then Callum, then smiled a little too knowingly. "Hard trail," he said. "Harder still if you don't know what you're running from." Wren didn't reply. She just took the apples and turned away. They made camp near a glacial stream that night, cold enough to still the breath, stars clear as glass overhead. Callum built a ring of stones and lit a fire, slow and low, his hands red from snowmelt. Wren brought down a hare with the rifle, cleaned it without flinching. They didn't speak until the meat was done, and the silence between them had turned from caution to comfort. "Why Bitterhorn?" Callum asked finally. Wren sat with her knees drawn up, coat wrapped tight. She chewed, swallowed. "Because it's far, because no one I knew would think to look there." Callum nodded, but she wasn't done. "There was a man," she said, quiet. "Back near Red Hill, took in strays, said all the right things. He fed me, let me sleep under his roof. I owed him," he said. Then he locked the door. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands had gone still. "I found the key on his belt, took it while he slept, left the door open behind me. I don't know what became of the others." Callum didn't speak, just looked at her, firelight flickering across the planes of her face. She didn't cry, he didn't touch her. But when she finished, he nodded, once slow and solemn. "You're not what he made of you," he said. "You're what you walked out with." Wren met his gaze, something raw in her eyes. "You think I'm broken." "I think you were forged." That night they lay side by side, not touching, but close enough to feel one another breathe. And in the cold, in the hush, something old and buried shifted in both their chests. By the next morning, the snow had started. Just a dusting at first, then heavier by noon. They pressed on, leaning into the wind, cloaks drawn tight, animals laboring with each step. Bitterhorn was near now. They could feel it in the bite of the air and the slope of the earth. They crested the final ridge by late afternoon and saw it below, a scattering of cabins among the trees, smoke curling from chimneys, the faint sound of a hammer striking iron. Civilization, shelter, a place to stop. Callum turned to her. "We can ride in together, or not, up to you." Wren studied the town for a long moment. Then she looked at him, the man who hadn't asked her to explain herself, who'd stood at her side through fire and silence and blood. "Let's ride in," she said. So they did. The town didn't look like much. A general store, a blacksmith, a stable, and a church. A dozen souls passed them without comment. No one looked twice. No one asked who they were. They found a room above the feed store. 2 beds, 1 window, a stove that ticked when it warmed. Callum paid in coin, and Wren unpacked the mule. They didn't speak of how long they'd stay. Didn't need to. Later, they sat on the porch, watching the snow drift down in wide, quiet flakes. Wren leaned her head on Callum's shoulder. "Doesn't feel like the end," she said. "It's not," he replied. And for the first time in a long while, neither of them feared what came next. Winter settled like a breath held too long, deep and quiet, pressing soft against the bones of Bitterhorn. Snowbanked the cabins, muffled the world to stillness, and turned the days to something slow and sacred. For the first time in years, Wren didn't wake with her fists clenched. The window frosted each morning with lacework frost, and each evening Callum would light the stove before she asked. They made routines not from need but choice. Callum found work splitting wood and hauling stone for the smith. Wren baked bread in the feed store's small kitchen, learned to wrap bandages at the chapel, taught the shopkeeper's daughter how to shoot sparrows clean off the fence post. Her laughter came more often, rough but real. They shared the room as if it had always been theirs. 2 beds at first. Then one, when the cold grew sharper and their silences turned to whispers in the dark. There was no declaration, no pledge, just the folding of bodies like pages long meant to meet. One morning in early March, the wind changed. Callum stood on the porch, mug steaming in his hand, and watched a figure ride in from the east. Dust on his coat, hat pulled low, gait too easy. Trouble carried itself like that, like it owned the land beneath it. Wren came out beside him. "That the kind of man who asks questions?" Callum asked. She looked once. "That's the kind of man who thinks he knows answers." They didn't run, didn't pack or hide. Wren met the rider in the street before he could tie off his horse. She stood there, shoulders square, chin lifted. The man blinked once like he hadn't expected her to be real. "You're a long way from Red Hill," Wren said. He looked her over. "Boss sent me for you, said he's got a debt needs payin'." Callum stepped out then, not loud, not sudden, just there, rifle in hand, loose and easy. "She owes no one," he said. "Not anymore." The man glanced between them, calculating. He saw something that gave him pause. Maybe it was the steadiness in Wren's eyes, or the way Callum stood just behind her, like the kind of shadow you don't walk through. Maybe it was the town, watching quiet from porches and windows, not ready to interfere, but not eager to look away either. The man spat once. "You two keep warm, then." He rode out without tying his horse. That night they didn't speak of it. Wren stirred stew in the pot. Callum poured water for tea. The fire cracked low, and the wind pawed gentle at the window panes. Later, as they lay curled beneath quilts stitched by hands long gone, Wren spoke into the hush. "I used to think I had to keep moving, that if I stayed, someone would find me, that I'd be weak." Callum brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "And now? I think strength looks like choosing to stop running." He kissed her then, not for the first time, but with the weight of all the miles behind them and the road they wouldn't walk alone. Spring thawed the snow. Grass broke through, green and wild. Cypress grew fat on clover. Folks began planting, patching roofs, speaking of the future like it was a thing worth tending. Wren and Callum bought a plot on the edge of town, small, sloped with a view of the ridgeline. She built a coop. He carved a table. And each morning they stood on their porch, hands around tin cups, shoulders brushing. The trail hadn't ended. Trails never do. But they'd found what they needed, not shelter, not safety, but someone to ride beside. And that, at last, was enough.